I am now live. What's up, Instagram? What's up? What's up? Talking about trauma in the body, part two. We're back. We are back. And thank you for everyone who joined us last week. So, Instagram is going to let you guys know that we are back this week. We're talking about trauma in the body, and I have a special guest who will be joining us. So, stay tuned, stay locked in. This is going to be great. Welcome everyone. I'm going to go ahead and let Marken in. He is our trauma therapist. Lean in. We had a great conversation last week about how trauma impacts our relationships. So this week we are going to continue. Hey, you're
How you
able to
doing?
log in.
I was able to do it this time, so I appreciate it. Thank you for your patience.
No problem. No problem. Oh, that's so great. That
Yeah.
is, yeah, last week we had, let me tell everyone, welcome, come on in. Last week we were trying to get you in,
Mm-hmm.
but we just had to go through bedrock counseling,
Yeah.
which that worked out fine.
Yeah.
That worked out. So, but thank you so much for joining again, part two.
Absolutely.
All right, how you doing today?
Doing well, doing well. I'm excited. I get to talk about um, one of my favorite subjects, mental health. My wife jokingly says I don't know how to turn it off. So, yeah.
That's great. That's great. I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. You said you don't know how to turn it off.
I
But
don't.
listen, when you're talking about something, you know it changes people's lives. You know it changes trajectories. It. I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. 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 I can remember watching an episode of This Is Us. It takes me like 2 hours. Because I'm just psychoanalyzing the entire cast.
This. It's something about those shows.
Yeah,
And it's so
yeah,
good. Everyone,
yeah,
this is really, really good. So I love those shows, different series, Netflix, and just watching the different stories unfold,
hmm
and you really get to see, wow, okay, this is not very healthy. This is not very helpful
hmm
for this relationship dynamic.
absolutely.
Is perfect. It's a perfect leeway. We can go so many different characters. Is a perfect leeway for our conversation tonight.
Yeah.
So last week you defined trauma for us.
hmm
Um, and if you can just go ahead and do the same thing, like start off with, okay, what is trauma for people who've heard the buzzword, but they don't know what it is. But this week we wanted to focus on the book. Hopefully you got the book.
I
Trauma
do.
Story.
I got it.
There we go. There we go. And thank you so much. I purchased my copy, so hopefully you guys get a copy. And I started to dive in. So much was said
Mhm.
last week. Like, oh, we got to bring up the book. We got to really unfold some things, particularly how trauma impacts the body.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Um, okay. Great startup question. What is trauma? Because it's the buzzword in our culture today, and you hear a lot of subjective definitions. But in a nutshell, trauma is anything that overwhelms you. You really don't have the resources to cope with. But trauma is not only the things that happen, but it's also the good things that never happen. And I'm gonna steal another trauma guru's definition. I think it's so good. He said, his name's Gabor Mate. He says, trauma is not what happens to you. Trauma is what happens inside of you as a result of what happened to you. Because Deborah, if you and I were siblings and we both grew up in an abusive home, although we were both traumatized, you could be more resilient than me to where you're able to still push through and lead a normal, healthy life.
Right.
And I'm stuck. I'm medicating with alcohol and drugs and other unhealthy things, and I'm struggling. I can't regulate my emotions. So it's just no rhyme or reason how it messes up some, whereas others are a little bit more resilient.
Mm-hmm.
But in a nutshell, I think in some weird way, we've all been traumatized.
Yeah.
And they need people like us, clients need people like us to help point to them where the effects of those traumas have affected them in their present day. Yeah. Sorry for the long definition.
No, no, that's so good though.
Yeah.
That's so good because my population, I really love, just like your bread and butter is trauma, my bread
Mhm.
and couples. I love
Yes.
couples, and you actually have a really good example of this in your book. And and I love to share like communication tips,
Mhm.
what's helping, especially couples. A lot of times when they come into counseling, they're in a high conflict state.
Mhm.
And you're teaching communicating skills on the,
Mhm.
you're teaching how to handle conflict.
Mhm.
But there is this what I described last, invisible elephant in the room,
Mhm.
underlying thing that keeps coming up
Mhm.
as couples get caught up in these cycles of their
Mhm.
fights. And it's something that has nothing to do with the dishes, with coming home
Mhm.
late, with parenting. It's something that actually happened years ago. And it is deeply embedded in someone. And I want you to talk to this. Um, and you described it as implicit and explicit memory. I really want you to talk about that today.
Okay.
I I was like, yes, this is what happens all the time, and couples don't realize it. Parent, child, whatever the relationship
Yeah.
dynamic is, people don't realize how they're getting caught up in the same ever-ending argument, and it's more than the argument. Can you talk about the implicit and explicit?
Absolutely. You jumped in my notes, but that's okay because I'm
Okay.
going off of your flow. That's fine. Uh, I talk about this a little bit on page 27 of my book. Explicit memory are the things we can recollect: our name, our social, our date of birth, the weather, our favorite TV show, whatever the case may be. But implicit memory are those memories that are attached to our trauma wounds. So, case in point, for example, um, if I experienced abandonment as a child, my parents weren't really consistent and making me feel like they were present emotionally and even physically. Later on in my marriage, whenever my wife disappoints me, those same feelings of abandonment will come back. But I don't know that. I'm just making a really big deal about man, she's running late again. And she's like, babe, why you tripping? It's only 10 minutes, but in my mind, I feel abandoned. I feel devastated. And I'm giving her a hard time. And I'm even more frustrated that she doesn't feel it the way I do. Because I think anybody would be upset as me because I'm trying to normalize it because I don't want to seem like I'm traumatized. And my
Right.
wife looking at me like, man, for a grown man, you really sensitive. What's up with you? But she don't realize I'm traumatized. She hit that wound. It's been activated already, right? Because as irrational as it may seem to another person, to me it feels so real and so normal
Mm-hmm.
that it's even more insulting for someone to deny its existence, or it's a sense of inconsideration for my wife to not really understand why I'm so frustrated and triggered right now. But it's not her job because she didn't traumatize me, and it's not her job to fix me, right? So oftentimes what may seem like communication issues within a marriage is really two people activating each other's trauma wounds, and all this implicit memories coming up, which is in the middle and back part of the brain, right? Because trauma is stored in our nervous system, but this is the part of the brain where those maladaptive memories and beliefs are. But we're arguing with the neocortex, the front part of the brain, where we could see the dishes. Maybe it's an intimacy issue. Maybe it's a communication problem where my wife feels I'm being insensitive. Whatever the case may be, but we're lighting up all these little trauma wounds, but we're arguing about something in the right now that has nothing to do with it. But trauma therapy helps me to realize, wow, I got some jacked up belief systems. All of this feeling of me not being good enough, inadequate, feeling like a failure,
Mm-hmm.
this not my spouse's issues.
Mm-hmm.
these are things I brought that have stayed with me from childhood and has affected my worldview. So every time I'm up for a promotion, every time I'm about to do a new business venture, I shoot it down because these negative beliefs that were formed from trauma are telling me, Marken, you're not good enough. Marken, you're inadequate. Marken, you're a failure. Marken, everything wrong in your life has been your fault. No one's ever preached that to me, but our trauma wounds have a way of imprinting these negative beliefs in our souls. Then we believe it. No one can convince us it's not real, but it's not until we heal, we realize, wow, me and my spouse are working through so much implicit memory, but we just need somebody to point that out so we could really get the help that we need. Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible. That's incredible. It's like, you know, those light bulb moments. As therapists, we love those, like just like a teacher when that lesson clicks for that student. Therapist is like, man, like that light bulb moment of, we've been arguing about this, but it's really not this.
Exactly.
Right here, like I said.
And one more thing, Deborah, I think the most frustrating thing with for couples is the person who's traumatized is hearing all this logic from the untraumatized spouse, but none of it is clicking because logic is left side of the brain, but the trauma hangs out in the right side of the brain where we feel everything, where everything feels personal. This is where implicit memory hang out at. Left side is all logic. This is where a lot of men hang out, but women have the ability quite often to operate in the left and right side of the brain. That's why so many guys, unless they've been given the proper emotional intelligence growing up and sensitivity, they can't really connect with this side. This is the traumatized side, but it's also how we relate to the world from a felt sense. And trying to explain something to a traumatized person, you're just wasting your time. It will never click because the left side of the brain kind of goes offline when you've experienced trauma. Logic makes no sense. Yeah.
So what kind of guidance, how do you help, you know, when you work with couples or, individuals who are in a relationship, they experience trauma, they held on to it in their mind, in their body, and their whole existence, their belief system is now, you know, they got their trauma lenses on, right?
Yes, great analogy.
Right? That's how I'm like, okay, this is your worldview, you know, these are my eyes, you know, without my glasses, I can't see. So it's like, okay, now you have on these lenses, this is how you see the world. How do you direct that person who is in a relationship? You know, they're coming to you for trauma therapy and they're saying, you know, my partner's not, you know, they don't understand, I'm being triggered in all of these conversations.
Well, because I'm kind of used to this, I don't panic. I let them, because I already have in my mind how to deal with the trauma, right? But I think that the first thing I need to do is validate them. Let them, you know, for example, if you were that client, you came into my office, I'm going to hear you out.
Yeah.
And you do a great job. I've seen some of the stuff you put up where you break down the difference between hearing and listening. I'm gonna listen without, although you know, in our field, within 5 minutes, we know what the problem is. But I'm not gonna be so quick to, oh, you need this, you need that. Oftentimes, people just want to feel like, for once in my life, did someone actually hear me? Make me feel like they truly listen. Validate them, because when you validate them, you make the client feel seen. You make the person feel heard. You make the person feel like, finally, somebody's making me feel like my voice matters. That goes a long way, because when I do that, oftentimes traumatized people are guarded. You know, they'll say stuff like, I don't trust people. That's why I don't do a lot of friends. They're really saying that little boy, little girl inside of me is hurt, and I'm guarded. It's no different than if I'm a middle school kid and I have a bully in the lunchroom and he's sitting around me, I'm like this because I'm ready for when he throws that punch, right? And that's almost how the state our nervous system is in, fight or flight. It doesn't know how to relax. It doesn't know how to just take a deep exhale. So I listen, but going into, I do want to explain that traditionally, when someone goes to therapy and all you're doing is talking with them, but they're traumatized, that's called a top-down approach. Okay. And what I mean by that is you're activating the cognitive part first, number one. Then in cognitive, I'm talking about the things you can relate to with your senses. And then secondly, you bring up emotions. It might bring up some emotions for certain topics, but it never gets down to the third part where the trauma's at, somatic, the body, right? That's top-down approach. That's why you hear people say, I've been in therapy for years and I still can't deal with this childhood issue. Because just talking to someone will never get where the trauma's at. The trauma, think of an avocado. The trauma is where that core of the avocado is. But talking all day, go ahead.
Right now, I wish you told me that. I would have grabbed my avocado.
but just talking to them, what you're doing is we're just giving them more information. Yeah. They need something that can make them feel safer in their body and more connected. Where a trauma modality like EMDR, for those who weren't here last week, it stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's not the only form of trauma therapy, but it's one of the popular ones, right? It's the bottom-up approach, where when you start trying EMDR, you feel it somatically first. So you're going to feel some discomfort. You're going to say, man, why am I balling my fist up right now? Why are my legs jittery? Why do I feel my heart palpitating? It's not no magic trick. What's happening is all that trauma that's been stored in your nervous system from childhood is starting to move. The parts of the brain that really hasn't been working, that has been frozen due to the trauma, right, it's actually starting to loosen up because EMDR activates the left and right hemispheres of the brain as we're working through a particular topic. So it's a complete opposite. It's bottom up. We're going right to the root of the trauma, and you will feel some discomfort. And it's my job as a clinician to guide you through to say, it's okay, this is normal. So that will be the modality to get to the root of it. But even before getting into the trauma modality, if most traumatized people don't feel seen, they don't feel connected. So I have to build a structure of safety and connection. Yeah. And going through the therapy part, that's the easy part. I need you to know that I'm not going to fail you like everybody else has. I'm going to be consistent. I got you. This is a safe space. If you want to really vent about things that aren't politically correct, go ahead and have at it. Because this is a place to where all of these unhealthy emotions and beliefs, to me, it's just smoke. It's just a byproduct of a deeper issue, a wound. As the clinician, I just see a wound. So I'm not going to look at you like, oh, how dare you, Deborah, say that? Because I know you're hurting right now. What we look at as brokenness is just your ability of trying to adapt to a threat that you never knew how to process or heal from childhood or years prior. And it's my job to slowly walk you through those dark corridors until you can come to a place of safety and healing. Yeah.
And that makes sense with the definition of trauma you opened up with, because according to the definition you use, sometimes we don't have the resources and the skills to deal with a traumatic news that they just got. You shared a book of very traumatic news. Your mom got a family member, and the person doesn't have resources right then and there to really adapt and deal with the trauma.
Yes.
You now to talk about in your book, finish it. And it's so good.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Thank you.
This week, how we store up trauma in our bodies. How do we hold on to a traumatic situation that happened when we were 12, or a traumatic situation that happened to us? You were very transparent.
Very.
Look, I was just reading. I'm like, oh my God! Like, this man, and he hit the ground running. Y'all get the book if you want to know what I'm talking about.
Thank you. Thank you.
So how do we hold and store trauma in the body?
Well, great question. We don't willingly do it. Our nervous system, the medical term for our nervous system is autonomic nervous system. And that word autonomic is just a real fancy way of saying automatic. God forbid we out in public right now having this live and somebody starts shooting. We're not thinking, I need to get to my car and run for safety. You're going to hit the ground. Some people going to freeze because we're in survival mode, right? And that's what happens in our nervous system. When we experience trauma, 4 things happen. We fight, we flee, we freeze, or we fawn. And fawn happens later on. This is where we continue abandoning ourselves. It looks like people pleasing because something in us has been broken, and we really can't pinpoint it. And usually fawning has a lot to do with people who grew up in an environment where their parents gave them adult responsibilities at too young of an age. They were parentified. Their needs were always shot down. They never felt like they mattered. They were important. So now as an adult, you're trying to people please in hopes of being validated and liked by random people, friends, because your caregivers never did that for you. But that's neither here nor there. I'm not trying to digress. But those 4 trauma responses, when that happens, a flood of things happen to the mind. The amygdala. It's the middle part of the brain. Okay. It's in the limbic system. It's in this back part of the right side of the brain. When something traumatic happens, 2 little almond-shaped things in the limbic system called the amygdala, it lightens up. And when that happens, my adrenal glands, which are these 2 little peas on top of my kidneys, they start releasing cortisol and adrenaline. You got something in the brain called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is like that virtual assistant that files all of these memories, really cute with folders and little tabs, make them look really nice. When you go into a traumatic response, the hippocampus it clears the desk off and goes right into helping the body pump that cortisol and adrenaline. That's why, in grade school, you'll see 2 people fighting. They didn't feel anything. They're cut up, they're bruised up. And the reason they don't feel anything because the body's pumping. The hippocampus is helping the adrenal glands pump high level of cortisol and adrenaline so that the body could activate and fight pretty much adapt, survive, right? And when that happens, so much is going on to where the memories are fragmented. That's why after something really horrible, news people are trying to interview the victims. They can't remember all the details. They remember bits and pieces, which is the worst time to interview someone because, the front prefrontal cortex, the thing that makes us aware, it goes completely offline. That's why you're not thinking, you don't even think about your own needs. They're not thinking about, did I eat today? Do I need to go run these errands? You can't think about that because your mind is still in survival mode. And until you calm down and regulate all of that stress and cortisol activation, it'll be hard for you to get back to a place of balance and normalcy. But when you're traumatized, you don't even know it. You don't realize it until you start to realize it no longer feels safe to you to go outside, to engage in the things you used to engage, or how you see an inability to connect with your spouse, your friends. People may look at you like, man, Deborah, you different now. Why are you so distant? Maybe you're battling depression because you don't feel safe within your own body and now around other people, but you don't have the words to articulate that. So you just come off relationally odd. We all have that person that we walk on eggshells around, and we're like, oh, I don't want to get around this person. But 9 out of 10 times that person is traumatized, but they don't know it. And they've normalized it with statements like, this is just the way I am. My mama was like this. This me, take it or leave it. But we're really normalizing trauma, but we don't have nobody to help us to see that. So all of this is going on in real time in the matter of a split second when you're traumatized, but you don't know it, but you can feel it. You feel something's off. And now you're trying to do life as normal again, but you don't realize like, wow, there's a disconnect. I really can't put language into it, but I need to get help. But if we don't get help, we just go through life fumbling, trying to normalize dysfunction, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah. Right. It's absolutely true what you said. A lot of times we normalize dysfunction, right? And we learned it from our family of origin. Like you said, my mama was like this, my grandma was like this, I'm gonna be like this, and we're done with it. And it's like, well, now let's talk about if mom and grandma was like that, that means there may have been some trauma there, and it passed down to one generation, and we pass on to another generation.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And what do you call that as a trauma therapist when trauma passes down from grandma, mom, and now your client?
Intergenerational trauma is so real, but it's just not it's just not the behaviors and the unhealthy things that were said to us, right? It's, excuse me, it's also a little bit of genetics. So let me explain. If a man and woman are both traumatized, there's high level of cortisol in his sperm cells, and high level of cortisol in that woman's womb where that child's grown for 9 months. Babies don't know words yet, but they can feel anxiety. They can feel tension. They can feel chaos, right? And it's no different than, unfortunately, when a baby's born to a crack addicted mom. That baby's entire central nervous system, mind, everything is off whack because they're coming out the womb already hot. And a baby that's traumatized is already dealing with a heightened nervous system or a nervous system that's frozen, because sometimes it's not always that you're rattled from trauma. There's also an opposite effect, the freeze state. Sometimes trauma freezes you. And if we have time to talk about the vagus nerve, I could explain how that can help to thaw out that frozen state of our nervous system as well. But depending what state you're in, that traumatized baby now having to grow up in a toxic environment, it makes a horrible, horrible recipe for a child who is already coming out the womb with a lot of odds against them and no real guidance and mentorship to say, hey, little boy, hey, little girl, this is how we're going to work through these things. You need this, you need that.
Right.
And unfortunately, that child will become another statistic if there's no kind of intervention.
Wow. Yeah. It has went down that explanation for that. I was just thinking of case study after case study.
Unfortunately.
Before
we have a question here from Truth. Go ahead.
We got a question and some comments here. I broke down the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn just in case you missed that. Sabine, we got a doula on here. Whoop, whoop. So I love that you're my babies. So doula on the line. She asked, is trauma stored differently based on what phase in your life it happened? For example, childhood versus past marriage/relationship. So the question was, if you missed it, is trauma stored differently based on what phase in life it happened?
That's a really good question. A majority of the major traumas we've been through were foundationally set based off of our earlier experiences, childhood, right? Because that's where our belief system is formed, and that's where a lot of the rational thoughts are formed. Everything else we go through later in life, whether that's breakups, divorce, death of loved ones, is just adding on top to those negative beliefs. Yeah, exactly. So that's not to say you went through your worst experience as a child, but the ones that have impacted you the most happened through childhood. Even when people say stuff like, I had a great childhood, my parents were amazing. And when I start asking questions like, did you grow up with one parent or two? Did they make you feel seen? Did they make you feel validated? Were they emotionally attuned to your emotions? When you start asking those kind of questions, you realize whether you come from money or you come from the hood, you can't escape trauma. We've all done, because there's no perfect manual on how to be an amazing parent and caregiver. And even if you are a great parent, you still can't be with your child 24/7 to protect them from the ills of life. Kids encounter things, and it has an impact and effect on them, whether the parents of that child realize it or not. So I hope that answered her question.
That's a really good point. We can keep going. We can keep asking other questions here. Hey, Trelicia, thank you so much for joining. Do you find that a lot of people would rather use the trauma as a crutch to not have to change the behavior? And maybe that's going back to when we were saying the comments about, well, my grandma was like this, my mom was like this, I'm going to be like this. What do you think, Marken?
Well, that's a great question. You know, it may seem like they're using it as a crutch, but truth of the matter, most people, one of the stigmas against mental health is the fear of, if I really gave this a shot, I'm afraid what I'm going to find out. Many people are terrified, right? So what they'll do is you'll hear a lot of cynicism, a lot of like scrutiny towards mental health. Oh, I'm not crazy. I don't need that thing. That's the girl. They just going to take your money. Man, I got time for that. And really at the heart of that is, I'm afraid what this person's going to say to me. So we we talk ourselves out of it because we fear of what we'll really uncover. Because what makes our line of work kind of difficult is not only do we have to pinpoint what it is that our clients need to work through, but we have to convince them something's wrong. We have to convince them and explain to them all of these years what has been normal to you, that's not normal. Granted, you are a product of your environment, but your environment wasn't normal, and it is now having an effect on you in your adult singleness or in your adult relationships, even in your parenting, whether you realize it or not. Because like I mentioned earlier, trauma keeps showing up in relationships. Some people think nothing's wrong with them, but for majority of people, they know something's off, but they minimize it in such a way where they've convinced themselves, I've been able to pull myself by my bootstraps. I'm doing life. Things are okay, right? And at the end of the day, trauma is inevitable, but it doesn't have to be a crutch. And people experience trauma differently. Others to where they can hide it, they can cover it up, because most of the traumatized people are not in some psych ward where they need medication 24/7. Most traumatized people are working professionals. They go to work every day, pay their bills, handle their business, take care of their kids, right? But when you hit that thing, they become something different. They almost have a little Jekyll and Hyde experience. As long as you don't bring up this topic, as long as you don't bring this thing, they're good. And that's the sign that there's the wound that hasn't healed. I've never met anyone who hasn't been traumatized, but I have seen the before and after of someone who was traumatized and got healed, how their quality of life has improved. And it don't mean once you've healed, where healing is past tense, it's present tense. You're still going to run into issues, but now you have a level of resiliency to where you can recover quicker. You can deal with it. Your capacity for it is much better, and you're not crippled by one incident or one particular trigger. Yeah.
So good. Yeah. I want to actually, I'm happy we kind of shifted, because I wanted you, and you kind of already answered Junior Dreamville's question. Thank you for just jumping on. Yeah, because he asked, is trauma inevitable? We were collectively traumatized in 2020 during a global, pandemic. You're collectively traumatized, and we all had to readjust and to learn new coping skills on how to deal with like our present reality. I want you to talk about resiliency. I want you to talk about how you mentioned, we could fight, flight, or freeze, but there's a process we could unfreeze. So which order you want to go in? I definitely want us to go in that direction.
Well, no matter which one of the four you're in, each process will all be on the same road of healing. Before you could get that's why I titled my book, Trauma Stories, Discovering Strength Through Our Vulnerabilities. In order to heal, you have to be vulnerable. But here's the problem. Vulnerability is the pathway that has traumatized so many of us. And now you have this therapist who you don't know telling you to get back on a road that never felt safe to begin with, right? But the only way you can be resilient is you have to be vulnerable. Think of any relationship you have, whether you're dating, whether it's a good friendship. For you to love deeply in that relationship, that relationship has to be tested. And there are moments in that relationship you are grieving. You're grieving arguments, you're grieving breakups, you're grieving injuries you've experienced from this person, and thinking to yourself, is it worth reinvesting myself? Is it worth being vulnerable again? And that takes a level of vulnerability and depth that a lot of people don't have the capacity for, especially if they haven't dealt with their issues, right? So I would say, regardless of given what state of trauma response you're in, will let me know how to approach it. I'll give you an example. If I'm going to tell you a story in one of the Trauma Guru books I read years ago, The Body Keeps the Score, amazing book. And the thing about this, the whole theme of that book is the mind is speaking the body is speaking even when the mind doesn't get it. It's like the mind is speaking English and the body speaking Spanish. And the body's saying, This is why I tense up when I get around men, because as a little girl, let me tell you what this first man did to me.
Right.
But the mind doesn't get it, because sometimes when we're traumatized, we do something called dissociation. We either don't remember at all what happened, or we created so much distance that it almost seems like a faint memory with all the details are fuzzy. And it's really our brain's way of protecting us. But when we get triggered, these thoughts come flooding in, and sometimes we don't know how to deal with it. So we medicate with drugs, sex, alcohol, and sometimes even busyness. Yeah. So if in that book, Body Keeps the Score, he tells a story of a couple who's in this massive car accident in Canada. It's like several hundred cars, and this one of the cars in front of this couple, they literally seen the entire family, because a semi truck fell on the car. They were crushed to death, right? And the husband is screaming. The husband's witnessing this. He's screaming, and his wife's over there. She froze. She's in like this zombie-like state. He's experienced fight or flight. When they did her brain scans, she's in freeze mode, right? And when you're in freeze mode, we actually have to activate something in the body. We have this nerve called a vagus nerve. I talk about that on page 31 and 32. In the very back of our brain, before we get to our spinal cord, we got these things called cranial nerves. It's 12 of them. They're long. They go all the way down throughout our body. Remember I said earlier, trauma stored in the nervous system?
Yeah.
Well, that's why you feel it. That's why when you get anxious, your heart's palpitating. Because you have all these major nerves from the base of the brain running through your whole body. Yeah. When you're anxious, sometimes you feel like you have diarrhea. It runs through your gut. Every part of you, sometimes you're so terrified, you're peeing on yourself. Why? Because it's running through, it's connected to your kidneys, everything, right? And the 10th nerve, cranial nerve, is this nerve called the vagus nerve. It's the longest nerve throughout the entire body. And that nerve actually needs to be activated. Different ways to activating is relaxate, deep breathing, sometimes putting a cold pack of ice on your chest. It's hundreds of exercises you can do, but this is for the frozen person, like that woman in that example in the book, right? But most people who are in fight or flight, or like people who've experienced PTSD, like war veterans, or people who've had near-death experiences, they actually have to learn to relax their nervous system. Because when you're in fight, flee, or freeze mode, I'm not freeze, but fight or flight mode, your nervous system is hyperactive. You're always thinking danger's around the corner. You don't trust people. You need to relax. That nervous system is rattled. So once I understand what's the issue, I'm gonna tackle it different. But at the end of the day, EMDR works across the board with all of it, because it's the bottom-up approach. That's why I said earlier, I got to spend so much time, first of all, getting you to trust me. Because if you're traumatized, you don't trust people. And then giving you tools so that when we start peeling back the layers of the trauma, you don't run and go, this crazy, I'm out of here. Yeah. So where I can like, hold up, calm down. Here's some exercises we can do to work through this. It's like I'm holding your hand and we're walking through it together. So it really depends on what the trauma response is for me to better address it. But healing is possible for everyone. I do want to say that. I'm not selling you a hustle when I say that. Yeah. It'll look different for everyone, but we all have the capability with God's help to heal on some level. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's so important, right? As a therapist, leaving your clients with hope, letting them know that even if you have experienced trauma, verbally, mentally, emotionally, in your body, somehow you've been violated in some way, it's important to know that there is hope for you to move on and move forward.
And one more thing, Deborah, as you were talking, this just popped up in my mind. Sometimes, a lot of times when people are coming to me dealing with addictions, like, man, if people knew this about me, I'll be so ashamed. And I start asking a couple of questions and really being a little invasive. I realized that, and this proves how a lot of our traumas have started in childhood. A lot of our unhealthy vices are just our way of trying to soothe ourselves whenever we feel triggered, right? Whenever those trauma wounds come up. But we just think, man, I got a bad habit. But if we really go back and pay attention to the patterns, we'll say, you know what? I feel the need to drink. I feel the need to get high. I feel the need to go out and have sex or watch this whenever
Mhm.
this thing comes up. Whenever no one's around and I need something to get my mind off of these thoughts. But we don't pay attention to that. We just think these vices, the cravings for these vices come at random times. But if we start paying attention to our patterns, we'll realize whenever those trauma wounds are activated or someone triggers us, that's when those cravings start calling for those unhealthy vices. Yeah.
That's so good. And that's
Mm-hmm.
important to learn healthy coping skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that you can go to that is healthy and
Yeah.
not destructive towards your mental and emotional well-being. All right, I want to make sure we get some time to ask questions. I know, we've been sharing a lot here. We talked about fight, flight, or
Mm-hmm.
fawn. We talked about the amygdala.
Yeah.
We talked about hippocampus. I was like, I feel like I'm back at it. We got charts and stuff. All good, because I love to learn and grow. So any questions in the chat having to do with trauma? I have a few that I want to ask, and then we will end for tonight.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
Any questions? I feel the need to online shop. Is the retail therapy? Retail therapy?
Don't do it. Don't make Amazon any richer.
I'm feeling bored. Let me go click. No, don't do it. Stay away. Stay away. But you know what I want to talk about, because talking about trauma in the body.
Yeah.
So I again, I work a lot of times with couples, and I want you to talk about for the man or the female in the couple relationship who they are having problems with physical intimacy because the body has been violated. They've experienced physical abuse. They've experienced sexual abuse
Mm-hmm.
or childhood, because like you said, a lot of this started with childhood. It's not only in childhood we experience trauma. We understood that.
Yeah.
But a lot of it happens in childhood. So, and now you talk about being vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
What?
Mm-hmm.
Now you talk about being vulnerable. So how have you worked with clients? You talked about a little bit in your book about, your own experience
Mm-hmm.
who have physically been violated, and now they are having a really hard time being vulnerable, being intimate in their relationship.
Yes, and that's very common. I typically see a different response for the man who's been violated when he was
Okay.
younger than the woman. With the woman, there's a sense to where sex doesn't feel safe at all.
Mm-hmm.
9 out of 10 times she's having sex with her husband, and every time she's doing it, she's cringing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's a reminder of the assault, and she's learned to look at sex from a taboo lens, not just something beautiful me and my spouse can do, but something that's disgusting. Let's get this over with. Just for him, I want to turn it on and off and keep it moving.
Right.
Whereas the man, I tend to see that if he's experienced sexual abuse, 9 out of 10 times, he's told no one about it, because there's not a safe space for men to say, hey, so-and-so did this to me, right?
Yeah.
So what the man tends to do is become hypersexual.
Mm-hmm.
He's trying to run through everything because he's trying to prove to himself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure he's trying to create so much distance between him and what happened that I'm a real man. Ain't nothing happened to me. But another thing too, sometimes for the man, there's a societal blind spot. Like I've counseled quite a few men who've experienced sexual trauma from older women when they were younger. So there's this sense when it happened, all his homeboys would say, "Oh man, you so lucky. You a real man. You get this grown woman." But then as they get older, they realize their response to that, they're responding in a way sexually now with their spouse, as if no different than when an adult man violates a little girl, right?
Oh.
They haven't, but they can't make that connection. They just think I can't connect with my wife sexually. But once I start to peel back the layers, I'm like, what you did with that older woman that your homeboys gave a lot of props for, you're a victim of sexual abuse. And I expand people's definition of sexual abuse. It ain't just somebody penetrated me or there was intercourse. If you're a child and another child violated you, another kid your age violated you, sexual abuse. If you're a child and you were exposed to pornographic material, sexual abuse. If you're a child, you walked into two other adults having sex and you didn't say nothing, but you watched an entire experience, sexual abuse. Because now your little childhood mind, instead of paying attention to your dolls and your little Lego sets, you're looking through the world through a lens that you're not ready to handle yet. But you don't know how to turn it off. It's like HD. Everywhere you go, you just see people naked. And you don't know how to communicate to this because you're a kid. And it's so unhealthy and toxic. And usually when it's the female that's been violated, I let her know that her response is actually normal given the circumstances. And then I have to go through the journey while doing EMDR to remind her it's not her fault. Because this is what happens when kids are violated. The body will naturally still give off a response of arousal. So now there's a sense of, I must have enjoyed it because why was I being aroused? And I got to explain to them, that's the way you were naturally created and wired, but what happened was still a violation. So stop beating yourself up. And then I try to help them to healthily place that blame so they can move forward with their life and don't see themselves as a victim, but now as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. So there's many different avenues to go with that, but it's the irrational thoughts and the negative beliefs we got to deal with while working through the trauma. Because if we don't deal with that, they'll never feel a sense of safety with their spouses. Yeah.
Right. Oh man, that is so powerful. That is good. That is that is helpful to so many people. I thank you for that,
Yes.
and the levels of sexual abuse, right? First time I was exposed to pornography way too young at a family member's house, and I wasn't sure what was I looking at, right? That childhood brain is so young and just underdeveloped. See, is way beyond their years, right? I'm sure so many people, when you get people to open up, when you get people to be vulnerable, you realize how many of us, like you said, everybody at one point traumatized some way, somehow. Whether we're willing to admit it or not, that's neither here nor there. But yeah, it's true, and it's important for us to be vulnerable, open up, share that, and know where to appropriately place blame.
Yes, and one last, and Deborah, one last thing: if it's a female who's been sexually traumatized in her past, that husband, as hard as it is for him to understand, her response to him is not about him, and he's going to have to be so patient to realize my wife is responding is reacting from a place of a wound and not towards a personal shot at me, and vice versa. If the husband is the one who's been sexually traumatized, right, his spouse has to understand this brokenness, however it's being externalized right now, whether it's through a porn addiction or whether it's through to where sex is like a medication to him, to where every time he feels down or sad, he's pressuring his wife for sex. As unhealthy as that is, that response is from a place of that wounded little boy. It's not from a place to where I have this inconsiderate husband. So as the other spouse takes a deep dive with that person on their journey towards healing, hopefully there's enough compassion to where they won't make it about themselves, but realize that their spouse is really hurting and broken. Yeah.
It sounds like it takes a lot of compassion, a lot of grace, a lot of patience, as your spouse, your partner is working through their trauma, so that you don't personalize their healing process.
Exactly.
Good stuff.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
I had another question in here. I want you, and then we'll wrap up. Can trauma affect short-term memory? Great question. Can trauma affect short-term memory? I think you touched on it impacting long-term memory, but what about?
I think how trauma can affect short-term memory is actually a symptom of depression. It interferes with our ability to concentrate, our ability to focus. Think about this. The trauma response of an addiction, of course, that'll affect short-term memory, because now you're giving all of your attention and focus to something unhealthy, to where you've thrown all your responsibilities to the side, and your most valuable asset, you're wasting it, which is your time that you can't get back.
Oh, wow.
Right? So that in and of itself will affect your short-term memory because your priorities are out of whack. So now you're forgetting to run the errands. Now you're forgetting to do what you need to do for your business or your job, to take care of yourself, to something as simple as forgetting to take care of yourself. To me, that's all a part of short-term memory because now
Right.
you're just neglecting your day-to-day responsibilities. Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
That is really good. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
great. Really good.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for the questions. These are really good questions.
Yes, they are.
And y'all came ready for part two, and I love it. You know what? We'll end here. Talk about irrational thought. And if there's anything else you can share, please do. Oh, and also the book. If you guys missed it in the beginning, Marcken Volmy is the author. Bring it a little bit of trauma stories. This is his book. He released it this summer. So get the book. You can find it on Amazon. It's a phenomenal resource. It's a phenomenal resource. I've been reading through it and I'm like, ooh, this is so good. I mean,
Thank you.
he held nothing back, okay, at the very beginning. So y'all got to get the book. And then if anyone needs your services, if they're looking for a trauma therapist, they've been really hesitant. They've been really scared, very nervous. You know, how can they find you? I feel like you were so open and just real, just a real human being, right?
Thank you.
Not very. How can people find you if they need your services?
They can find me on my name, markenvolmy.com. That's my website. But it's in my link in bio. On Instagram, I have two handles, at Bedrock Counseling, which is my practice, and my name, Marcken Volmy. And I'm also on Facebook, TikTok. I think something I try to do, sometimes I get to a place where I'm full. If I'm full, I'm still going to direct you somewhere. Because I don't get excited if people come to me. I get excited at the mental health conversation that's going forward, especially for Black and brown people. Right. We're breaking the stigma by normalizing the same way we'll go to a physical doctor to take care of our physical bodies.
That's right.
Our mental health is no different because this brain is connected to this body. We got to check in with that as well. So it just, I point them to certain directories if I'm too full, because at the end of the day, my goal ain't to help everybody. I'm just one person. That's why, Deborah, I think I said it during the last live, I don't see you as another clinician as my competition, because we all have some level of brokenness and adaptation to threat we're trying to work through. Yep. I can't see several thousand people. So whoever I can throw your way, I'm sending them to you. So
that's right.
So yeah.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And you know what? And you have your limitations as a clinician, right? You have to know where you like, you know what? I can't help at this point.
Exactly.
We've done great work together, but at certain points, you know, I'm not a therapist. Mm-hmm. So I want to refer this person to Marcken because I want them to get the best care possible. I want the best care possible. So totally 100% agree with you.
Yeah, thank you.
And I've dropped your handles there in the comment section.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate that.
Find the man that they need. Okay, so let's talk about irrational thoughts. You mentioned it earlier. For anyone on here who's ever dealt with an irrational thought, because guess what? We all have dealt with irrational.
Yes.
We're all in this together. Break down what's an irrational thought and how does trauma create irrational thoughts?
Yes. When we experience trauma, we pick up two things. We pick up first of all, we pick up a disconnection within our bodies and our mind because trauma affects our thinking and how we feel physiologically within our bodies. And because there's a disconnect, now we have negative beliefs that we form, such examples of that is, I'm not safe, this world not safe, everything's my fault, I'm inadequate, I'm not good enough, I'm a failure, everything bad is my responsibility, it's my fault. But then we develop these irrational thoughts irrational thoughts could sound like, you know what, if a woman was sexually assaulted, it could sound like, you know what, if I didn't dress like that, I would have never been assaulted. Or if I was just a little nicer to my gaslighting, emotionally toxic boyfriend, then he wouldn't have came at me like that. Because I know when he's drinking, I need to leave him alone. Like we've normalized toxicity because we have nothing else to compare it with. And I'm thinking it is so normal. It could sound like sometimes irrational thoughts could be like, this is how my dad treated women, and this is how I'm gonna treat my wife. She need to take it or leave it. She got to get with the program. And we really mean that from a sincere place because the model, the blueprint, what we've had was broken and toxic, but because we haven't dealt with our own issues, intergenerational trauma is trickling down. Sometimes the rational thought for a woman can be, all of these men aren't good because one guy has hurt her. So now she's thinking in absolutes. Life will never get better. I'll always be a victim. I'll always feel this way. These men will always hurt you. But it feels so real. What I mentioned earlier, how those that traumatized part of our mind that thing feels so real to us, but other people are looking at it like, you've had 2 bad boyfriends. All men are hurting you? Really? So so we have to get help to realize that our thinking's a little bit off, right? And even though you're dealing with irrational thoughts, even as a clinician, it's still my job to validate how you're thinking and how you're feeling. Just because I'm validating it don't mean I agree with it, but I'm letting you know I hear you, I see you. Now let's try to figure out a way to work through this.
That's so good. You got to work through those irrational thoughts.
Absolutely, absolutely. You ask some good questions. If you ever quit being a therapist, you'll make a great journalist. So those are good questions.
You know, on high school, I was in a magnet arts communication broadcasting program. So I wanted, you remember 106 in Park, AJ and Free?
Yeah. AJ and Free.
I wanted to be like your childhood as a celebrity. You know, a celebrity child star. Yes.
That's funny.
So
that's cool.
I'm happy either way. But thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. You guys.
Your audio went out. Okay, there you go. Okay.
In the call. But thank you guys so much. Give a thumbs up if you learned something. If you learned anything, give us a thumbs up in the chat. Thank you so much. You guys asked good questions. I'm gonna make sure that I didn't miss anything. I think I got everyone's questions and comments. But if you enjoyed this, give us a thumbs up. I appreciate you, Marken, so much for doing this.
No problem.
Not 1 week, but 2 weeks.
This was fun. I enjoyed therapy, but the reason I enjoy this a little bit more, because I know, like I mentioned last week, somebody's going to hear something who's not in therapy and at least be a little inquisitive about checking it out.
Right. And you know what? And I love that you mentioned that. What's one last final, if someone has been hesitant about seeking therapy, seeking mental health services, and they've just been hesitant for years or months, what's the one thing you would leave them with?
The one thing I would leave them with is stop dismissing what happened to you. And the reason you probably dismiss it because you don't think you matter. And if you don't believe you matter, of course, you're not going to think your story matters. But there is value, dignity, and purpose in your story, what happened to you. It doesn't have to be the end of your story. Healing on the other side will look different for you, but at the same time, it could help you to become more present and content in just where you're at in life right now and more happier. Doesn't mean it's going to fix everything, but I wouldn't want anyone on this live to go through life with the regret of what would it look like if I would at least attempted to address my mental health to see if things could have gotten better. Because sometimes we don't know how to fix something if we don't even know what's wrong, but we can feel it, but we can't articulate and put language to it. I would encourage anyone, it wouldn't hurt to check in with someone, get a free consultation. There's so many resources out there of how you can get help. And I think it could work wonders, not just for yourself, but also the people you do life with. that you connect with on a day-to-day basis, they will feel the results of a healthier emotional you. Yeah.
That's empower. That's empowering. That's empowering.
Thank you.
They will feel the result of a more healthier, emotionally healthier you. Your kids will reap the benefits.
Yeah. Yeah.
Reap the benefits. Your employees, for those of you here who are managers, your church family, like everyone is going to, and most importantly, you're going to reap the benefits of
Yes.
having gone through therapy and started healing. So if you've been thinking about it and you've been waiting on a sign, this is your sign, guys.
There you go.
This is your sign. Thank you so much,
You're
Marken. I really appreciate it. This has been such a
Yeah.
blessing, such an eye-opener, such an educational space for those who probably didn't know that they've been walking around with trauma and it's been impacting them in so many different areas of their lives. So thank you.
Thank you.
If y'all just joining, you guys, it's okay. It's my page. I'll tag you, Marken.
Thank you.
On his page, and you guys can check out the replay. This has been phenomenal.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Bye, guys. Thank you,
Bye.
guys.
Take care, y'all. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.